end to this terrible, terrible injustice.
Earlier, the Tory party chairman used his opening address to take a swipe at Labour.
I have these available at the Conservative shop outside for just £16.99, also online.
Waving flip-flops featuring Sir Keir Starmer's face, Greg Hands mocked the Labour leader, suggesting he doesn't have a clear position on issues affecting the country. He described the opposition as a party that's incapable of running anything well.
Who is the real Sir Keir Starmer? The friend and supporter of Jeremy Corbyn? The puppet of Tony Blair? Or the mouthpiece of Just Stop Oil? All we do know is that he has broken every single leadership pledge and flip-flopped almost 60 times in just 3 years. This is a man who will literally say anything that suits him at that time.
His comments came just hours after the Prime Minister refused to commit to tax cuts. Rishi Sunak said his focus is on halving inflation because it impacts the poorest the most. On a visit to Burnley, the PM insisted his approach is deeply conservative, saying it's a Thatcherite policy.
The best tax cut that we can deliver right now is to halve inflation. Now, that's something that I'm deeply committed to. It's the first of my 5 priorities. Why? Because that's how we can help people with the cost of living. We just want to put more money in people's pockets. And the best way to do that right now is through halving inflation. And that is a deeply conservative approach to this. And my colleagues understand that. This is what Margaret Thatcher did.
Tax is set to be a key issue over the next 4 days, with more than 30 Tory MPs promising not to support the autumn statement if it contains any hikes. Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting says they're right to question the PM's tax policies, including inheritance tax.
After 13 years of Conservative government, we end up in a position where even its own MPs are having to campaign against their unfair tax policies. And I think Conservative MPs are quite right to say, how is it that we've got the worst, highest tax burden in 70 years? They should also be asking Rishi Sunak why, instead of thinking about cutting taxes for working people, he's looking to give himself and other super rich people a tax break by cutting a tax that affects 4% of people in this country, a tax cut that would earn him personally £300 million.
The family of a teenager who was killed in a bus crash on the Wirral say her death has left a massive void in their lives. 15-year-old Jessica Baker died after her school coach hit a reserve on the M53 on Friday. Her head teacher has described her as unequivocally kind and empathetic. The driver, Stephen Shrimpton, was also killed when the bus overturned. A key part of the Windsor framework has come into effect for Northern Ireland, with a new system introduced to move products from Great Britain. Goods which are being transported to the EU will use a red lane, which includes customs declarations, while those bound for Northern Ireland will use a green lane with minimal paperwork and no checks. This is GB News across the UK, on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's time for Camilla.
Good morning and welcome to the Camilla Tominey Show, live from the Conservative Party conference in Manchester. As you'd imagine, we've got a lineup of big guests for you as ever. And I'm here with Michael Gove, Levelling Up Secretary and the MP for Surrey Heath, as billed. Lovely to see you, Mr. Gove. Thank you for coming on the show this morning.
Pleasure, Camilla.
Now, I'm intrigued because when I announced that you were coming on this show, I obviously said you were coming on, Priti Patel and others, and I received a memo from 2 different people describing you as a net zero architect. So there's a bit of scurrilous behaviour going on, maybe by some in the more climate sceptic wing of the party, pointing out the fact that you're the one that's pushed for all of these net zero measures, you're the one who wanted the petrol and diesel car ban, you're the one that cozied up to Greta Thunberg. The list goes on.
Yes.
And you've had to climb down on this climate stuff. I think David Cameron once famously called it the green crap. I mean, how are you feeling about this? Because you did push this agenda, but have you now realised that it's just not politically expedient?
No, I'm passionate about the environment, and when I was Environment Secretary, we did a lot in order to ensure that as we left the European Union, we took advantage of the new freedoms that we had actually to be a greener country. The ban on new petrol and diesel cars that we brought in at that time was for 2040.
Yes.
It's now 2035,
Yes.
so it's more ambitious than when I was doing that job.
2030.
It was.
And you did say quite recently, no, there's absolutely no way we're going back on that timeline.
Well, I certainly think that it was right to move from 2040 to 2035 and to show a greater degree of ambition. But as the Prime Minister's pointed out, we're world leading.
Yes.
In our moves towards net zero, in our decarbonisation. And of course, the environment is about much more than dealing with climate change, so that is the single biggest threat
Yes.
to our environment. And the Prime Minister, I think, is right to say, look, we're going to meet those targets, but we do not want to do so at a time when people are feeling the pinch, which will actually hit them hard in the pocket when we don't need
On
to.
reflection, was it because at the end of the day it's not very popular with Tory voters? We've seen this opinion polling, which I think is interesting in The Observer. You know, you're now only 10 points behind after this climate climb down. So were you a little bit out of sync with Tory voters, do you think, and Rishi Sunak's caught up?
No, I think that you're absolutely right that taking a long-term view and at the same time also making sure that we don't hit hard-working people is the right thing to do.
I know, but you
overall,
did say that ban 2030 was immovable.
Yeah.
And it's been moved.
Yeah, but overall...
And Sunak talks about Keir Starmer being flip-floppish.
Well, we can get on to Keir Starmer in a second.
Maybe
but the key
later.
thing is that if you're travelling in a direction, and the direction that we're travelling is greater environmental protection and net zero, then sometimes you can accelerate and sometimes you can decelerate, but you're still travelling in the same direction.
Now we're talking about speed. Let's talk about HS2.
Yes.
Whether it's speed or capacity is still open to debate. This whole prevarication over the Manchester leg, you are the levelling up secretary. If you don't do this Manchester leg, you're not levelling up. I mean, Boris Johnson, your former colleague, has said that Rishi's out of his mind to think of scrapping this part of this rail project that, let's face it, has somewhat crept out of control from a budget perspective. We've got this ludicrous situation where it's not coming to London, so it's probably actually going to take more time to go to Old Oak Common, to get on it, to go to Birmingham, to maybe not go to Manchester. And then what's happened to Northern Powerhouse Rail? You're not levelling up the north at all.
Well, the first thing is work is still going on HS2, even as we speak. The second thing is I can't, and you wouldn't expect me to speculate on...
What do you reckon there?
Well,
I mean, you're so close to the action, you must know.
No. I think the most important thing is to make sure that we get value for money from every pound that we spend on transport. And critically, we need to make sure that as well as linking north and south, we also link east and west. And we also need to make sure that links within cities like Manchester are spent as well.
Manchester and Leeds still don't have that rail link. You know, you can't easily get across the Pennines in 2023. If you were in the north, you'd be angry. You'd be saying, no, this government is far too London-centric. It isn't all roads lead to London. It should be a road leads from Sheffield to Leeds to Manchester to Newcastle.
I agree that we've been too London-centric in the past, and that's why we have a long-term plan for levelling up with lots of different ingredients.
So you must think that HS2 should go to Manchester then?
Well, I think levelling up involves doing many more things.
Give us your position on that. Should it go to Manchester?
Well, I think we need to make sure that we're getting absolute value for money from it.
Come on, you must be able to have an opinion on whether it should go to Manchester or not.
I absolutely think the most important thing is making sure that when we level up, we take into account all of the things that we need to do. So we've shifted Arts Council funding.
I know, but should it go to Manchester,
research
yes
and
or
development
no?
funding. Well, we're going to have to...
Should it? Not will it?
We're going to have to look at every conceivable pound that we spend on transport in order to make sure that we get value for money from it.
Still not an answer to the question whether you think it should go to Manchester. All right, so your answer to that question. Let's try and get an answer to another question. The tax burden is scheduled to be, I think, 37.7%, the highest in peacetime. You know this. You've got a caucus of your own party on the right saying we will not support any more tax rises. Trust Priti Patel, who's coming on later. What do you think of these colleagues? They've also been apparently exchanging WhatsApp messages, not those specific people, but we've seen some WhatsApps talking about Rishi Sunak having the charisma of a doorknob. What's going on here? Are you behind this caucus saying that taxes should come down? Or do you think they're being scurrilous?
No, I think every Conservative wants to bring taxes down and to reduce the tax burden. But the thing we must do first is to bring inflation under control. The biggest tax cut that we can give to the country is bringing inflation down.
Yeah.
But naturally, whenever Conservatives can, we always want to cut taxes. And the colleagues who are making that argument are, to my mind, simply making the argument that all of us in government believe in as well.
So should the Chancellor cut taxes come the autumn statement?
Well, as to which taxes, when, it's the Chancellor, you quite rightly point out,
Yeah.
who will decide. And I believe that it is only after we deal with inflation effectively
Yes.
that we can then cross that threshold. We do want to reduce taxes, but I can't anticipate where we will be on that journey at this stage.
And on the inflation point, there's been some suggestions by Caroline Wheeler on the Sunday Times that Jeremy Hunt has been sort of overheard speaking about the idea of having an election once inflation is below 3%. So if it happens in the spring, it happens in the spring. If it happens in the autumn, it happens then. Have you heard anything about when there might be an election? I know it's next year, but which of those 2 seasons?
I certainly don't know.
All right, fair enough. Also, let's talk about you and talking about Boris and your son on Sunday, because I was intrigued by this.
Yes.
You said you sort of patched things up and you had a long and deep and meaningful conversation. And I just wondered if you can enlighten us at all as to what was discussed, what you think of Boris Johnson's future in this party. Is it a shame that he's not at conference, making his unique contribution?
Well, you're absolutely right. The Sun on Sunday have a brilliant interview,
Yes.
pages 14 and 15 today.
Yes, I've read it.
Kate Ferguson, I would recommend
Brilliant.
more people read it. As for Boris, look, I enjoyed working for Boris. We all know that Boris is a politician with massive gifts, but also, he made some mistakes, and we all know what happened as a result of that. I had the opportunity to talk to him at a social event a wee while ago, but in fairness to Boris, he's now a private citizen, so it's a private conversation.
Did you ever apologise for the leadership knifing of 2016 to him?
I think a long time ago, yes.
Do you regret that now?
I think that there have been so many turbulent toings and froings that it's probably best for historians to judge what was right and what was wrong rather than me.
How do we think historians are going to judge Suella Braverman's speech on Wednesday? Do you agree with her? Thoughtful. Well, I mean, I look at Britain, I think that it's a very multicultural country, and it's been hugely successful as that. So do you disagree with Suella then?
No, because I think she was making a very specific point, which is that for us to continue to be a successful multi-ethnic, multiracial country, we do need to make sure that we have a core of values that everyone who lives here accepts and coheres around: the rule of law, democracy, tolerance for minorities, and so on. And we have been successful. If you look at the cabinet, if you look at the Parliament, if you look at the leadership that we have in the media, in the private sector, in so many other areas, Britain, I think, is probably one of the most successful multi-ethnic, multiracial democracies in the world. But you only maintain that success if people have confidence that your policy on migration and your policy on integration is
Okay, so
sensible.
how's it failed then? And is she actually guilty of dog whistle politics? There's some who's talking about this point she's made about people claiming persecution because of their homosexuality. And actually, it's only a tiny proportion of migrants, yet she's made that a big thing. So is she blowing a dog whistle?
No, I don't think so at all. I think Suella was making a number of thoughtful points. One of them was that we obviously need to provide people with the reassurance that we're dealing with illegal migration in order to maintain the happy situation that we have in the UK. We're one of the countries.
The electorate doesn't have that insurance.
Well, we'll come back to that. We are one of the countries in Europe, if not, I think, the best when it comes to showing warmth and a welcoming attitude towards people coming here illegally, who are genuinely fleeing persecution. But it's also the case that the number of people who are coming here illegally, particularly on small boats, has diminished. There is more to do, but Suella, Rob Jenrick and the team are working very hard on that.
I noticed as well from your interview, you talked a little bit about knife crime, that tragic case of Eliane Andam being killed in Croydon last week, which was just horrific. And you talked a bit about lockdown and whether you were asking yourselves questions about whether we should have locked down schools. Is that something you regret now? Because you were a lockdown hawk, you were pushing for things to be locked down. Do we lock down too much?
Well, I think we now have an opportunity to reflect on the whole... Oh, sorry, it's my phone.
Oh. Who is it?
No.
Should you answer it?
No, not on this.
Is it Rishi Sunak?
Not on this occasion.
No.
We now have an opportunity to reflect on that. I do think it was absolutely necessary to lock down in order to prevent the spread of the virus, but I also think that we can look back and learn lessons for the future, and I think the area that was most painful and difficult was locking down schools.
But do you regret being so hawkish?
No.
OK. One more question, if I may. It might sound a little self-indulgent, but I was intrigued this week to hear from your colleague Caroline Noakes calling for this channel to be closed down. You're appearing on this channel this morning, and we're delighted to see you, Secretary of State. Do you think that GB News should be closed down?
Of course not. We shouldn't be in the business of saying close down free speech. And GB News is a valuable addition to what I think some people have called the broadcasting ecology. People should have more choice.
Thank you.
There should be more voices. Yes, there'll be people on GB News who will say things that are offensive. There've been people on the BBC who've said things that are
Indeed
offensive.
so, and indeed on other channels.
And other channels as well. So, you know, the key thing is channels should decide their own.
We need to leave it there.
GB News is great. I mean, and I think, you know, the more people who tune in and hear you, Camilla, and Chris Hope and others, the better.
Thank you, Michael Gove. Thank you very much. We'll be back very, very shortly.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Steve Stephen Timms, Labour MP for East Ham and Chair of the Work and Pensions Select Committee, joins me now. Stephen, thank you very much for sharing some time with me on this Sunday morning. Now, I appreciate it's the Labour Party conference next week in Liverpool. We are with the Tories as we speak. Stephen, let's just talk about the private schools policy, which is one of the kind of nailed-on policies that we're actually sure that Keir Starmer does want to introduce if he becomes Prime Minister next year. Now, there's been a bit of a flip-flop on this policy. You initially said you wanted to strip private schools of their charitable status, as well as charging VAT on school fees. You've taken away part of that. You're saying that you don't mind the schools being charitable, but you still want to put VAT on. Is this policy just completely confused? What's going on? Or is it another example of Sir Keir Starmer being Captain Flip-Flop?
I don't think it is. I mean, the crucial thing is the tax changes and the question of why these tax breaks are appropriate for private schools. I can't think of any justification for them. I think other than that it's the way it's always been done. I think the party's right to say that private schools should pay VAT along with everybody else, because that will generate some much needed funds to improve state schools. Which, and in the end, it's in everybody's interest, including the interests of people who send their children to private schools, for state schools to be doing a really good job.
But it's not in the interests of people who send their children to private schools to have 20% added to their bills. Keir Starmer has said, oh, well, it's hopefully the schools won't pass these charges on. But if you listen to any of the independent schools bodies, they're saying that parents will be leaving in their droves. That will then push an estimated 40,000 private school pupils into the state system. How will Labour be able to cope with those children? How quickly will they be able to build the classrooms needed to accommodate them?
Well, the Institute for Fiscal Studies looked at this and says that they don't think there will be a big move away from private schools. But I come back to the key question: why should private schools have these tax breaks? What is the justification for them, other than that's how it's always been done? I think it's absolutely right to take a fresh look at this and accept that private education should be taxed in the same way as other services. We have to pay VAT on everything else. Why not on school fees?
And what about the other criticism that actually it will make the private school system even more elitist, because your likes of your Eatons and your Winchesters, they'll be able to afford the fee hike, the parents there. These schools have got great reserves, massive endowments, lots of investments. But most independent schools are of 400 pupils or less. They're serviced by parents of children who are just about managing to afford the fees. These are the very kids one imagines that Labour are behind in terms of social mobility. They're the ones who are going to be forced out of the private sector into the state sector.
Well, private schools are overwhelmingly used by better-off families for obvious reasons, and I think it's perfectly reasonable to expect them to pay the ordinary taxes for that service that we all pay for every other service. I don't think there's any justification that I've heard.
Private school parents already pay tax, don't they?
Education.
But Mr. Timms, private school parents, they pay tax. They pay tax, but they don't use the schools. So in a way, you could argue that the government owes them a rebate.
But why should education, private education, benefit from a tax break that doesn't apply to anything else?
OK, fair point, fair point. Let's move on to you, Les, if we can, because obviously I'm noting your constituency being East Ham. What do the good people of East Ham make of you, Les? And is this a disastrous policy from the Mayor of London, who, of course, is for your side, Labour, Sadiq Khan?
Well, Sadiq Khan is doing a great job, and I really welcome the improvements in air quality that my constituents in East Ham have benefited from. The ULEZ came in here several years ago. There was one constituent who came to see me who was worried about it, but it went in really with very little comment, and it's definitely contributed to a much appreciated improvement in local air quality. And of course there's more that needs to be done, but it's a big step in the right direction.
There has been some criticism of Sadiq Khan in the week for taking his eye off the ball when it comes to knife crime in the capital. You'll be familiar with the tragic death of Eliane Andam on Wednesday in Croydon. Has he been focusing too much on some of these green policies and not enough on trying to rid the capital of lethal blades?
Well, what happened in Croydon was absolutely terrible, and there's been far too much of this over a period, including some tragic deaths in my own borough in Newham. I think what we need here is a really good cross-government strategy focusing on tackling this massive problem. We just haven't had that.
Yes.
The mayor is playing his part. The Met Police in my area is working really, really hard, but they don't seem to have the backing of the government. That's the change that I think is needed here.
I'm going to ask you this as well, Mr. Timms, because our viewers and listeners may not remember, but you were yourself stabbed by a constituent. There's been some talk in the news this week about the ease with which particularly young people can obtain knives online, that they can go and buy very sharp knives, zombie knives and other knives on Amazon. Do you think there should be an age limit on the purchase of knives? Do we need to bring in more regulations to stop the sales of knives to young people?
Yes, we do, specifically online sales, because of course they are not caught by the bans which apply to shops in the UK. I campaigned on this in 2018. I was promised that these changes would be in the online safety bill, and they are in the online safety bill. The online safety bill is still not yet in effect, but I'm hoping when it does come into effect, we will finally have much better protections against online sales of these appalling weapons, which too many people are still getting hold of at the moment.
And Mr. Timms, obviously it is your conference next week in Liverpool. We understand that Keir Starmer's struggling a little bit with his speech. What would you like to hear from the Labour leader next week in Liverpool?
Well, Keir Starmer has done a superb job in positioning the Labour Party as a credible alternative government. I was campaigning in Glasgow, Rutherglen in the by-election this week and met people there switching both from the Conservative Party and the SNP to Labour. And he's done a fantastic job. He's set out the 5 missions which he wants to be the hallmarks of his government. And I'm no doubt that next week we are going to start to hear some more of the details, and I think that'll be an important step forward. But the missions, the kind of 10-year missions he set out, I think are absolutely right.
Yes, although the poll gap between Labour and the Conservatives has narrowed, according to Opinion. In the Observer today, you're only 10 points ahead and you had been 25. So it's not all going right for Keir Starmer, is it?
Well, I don't think anyone expected us to be 25 points ahead by the time of the general election. I'd happily settle for 10 myself. You know, it's a remarkable turnaround for the Labour Party since Keir became leader. And I think his speech next week will be a very important opportunity to spell out further to people how Labour will change Britain. As the chief executive of Iceland said when he resigned from the Conservative Party yesterday, nothing seems to be better today than it was when the Conservatives came to power 13 years ago. It's desperate time for a change.
Stephen Timms, thank you very much indeed for joining this morning. Lovely to speak to you.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
And Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Priti Patel, former Home Secretary and MP for Witham. Nice to see you.
Good morning.
Newly damed. I saw you at
correct,
Windsor
yes.
Castle. Was it Princess Anne?
It was.
That must have been lovely.
It was just incredible. Really humbling.
You were wearing bright pink.
Yes,
Which is
and
lovely.
you know, I was with a lot of people that have given a huge amount to the country, public service, frontline individuals. So it's incredibly humbling.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Let's get straight into conference matters because I am intrigued. There's a little bit of mischief making going on. I think among some Tories. Can we include you in that simply because you've signed this letter along with Liz Trussy and Duncan Smith and others about tax? And you're saying to the Chancellor, if you put taxes up again, we will not support you. And if you add up all the numbers, you know, you could actually challenge the government on this. It could be a pretty effective rebellion. Meanwhile, we hear members of the CDO, the Conservative Democratic Organisation, no names are being named, but they're quoted in the papers as having written on WhatsApp groups things like the PM's got the charisma of a doorknob. What's going on here, Priti? I mean, you're meant to be a nest of singing birds ahead of conference.
So, well, look, Camilla, I think you've been to conferences many times, and you know me well enough in terms of my instincts, and I'm a grassroots activist first and foremost. I actually think party conference should be about our members.
Yeah.
So, first of all, you've asked, are we making mischief? The answer is no. The point about the tax pledge is that this is now our last conference before a general election. I think it's right, and I think the other thing is actually there's more unity amongst Conservative backbench MPs that we must have a Conservative vision and an ambitious programme and platform to go into the next general election that importantly differentiates from Labour.
Well,
because
even Michael Gove is suggesting that there should be tax cuts, but I suppose the economists will be asking, where does the money come from? The government under Boris Johnson and now under Rishi Sunak with furlough and all the rest of it has spent too much money.
Well, we know the size of the state has grown far too much, but I also think we have to look at quite a few things actually. One is the overall rate of taxation. There was the IFS report that was published on Friday, and actually it was a very good report. It was a detailed report that showed the share of public spending. The state has grown more than the tax receipts that are coming into government.
So what do we cut? Which departments do we cut?
Well, every department can take a cut.
We cut the Home Office?
So last year, I'll give you the one example. Last year, before I left the Home Office, I gave the police a pay increase, and that was part funded from backroom, from the actual Home Office budget.
Yeah.
And I think more of that needs to come. We also need to, there's a lot of work we need to do in government though, Camilla, as well. When you think about the way society is going, we've got a lot of people that are not in work, that are not actually being supported to get into work. I'm a former employment minister, and I was part of the team that brought in universal credit. We brought in big changes to the welfare
We need to do more with universal credit.
We must give people more support. We've got to make people productive. We've got to help people get back
Do you think
into
it's a
work.
post-COVID thing, that people are just not willing to go back into the workforce? Are you
again,
saying people are lazy? What
I'm
are you
not saying that, but again, if you look at the IFS report, there are some shocking projections in there, even by the OBR, around the number of people going forward by 2028 and in future years, working age, that ends up claiming benefits.
Yeah.
We need to find ways in which we can support them, because we can't always say, it's fine, the state is going to step in. The state should step in, absolutely, for people that need that help and that safety net, which is what universal credit has always done.
But do you think the state is stepping in too much?
So I do. I absolutely do. And that's down to us in government, but also it's up to us as Conservatives in government to put forward the alternative that gives hope, opportunity and aspiration back to the British public, so that they know they've got economic security.
Let's talk
with
about
this as well.
hope and aspiration. Do you think that your predecessor, Suella Braverman, is spreading hope and aspiration by saying that multiculturalism has failed?
So, look, I think first of all, I'm going to just say that, the job of Home Secretary is a very difficult job.
I know. Do you think she's doing a good job?
Well, she's spoken. She's given a speech this week, and she's right to speak about a range of issues.
But do you agree on that multiculturalism aspect? Because people will say you've got a lot in common, both of you. You're both the children of immigrant parents.
Well, we're not on our own.
No, indeed. You're both Home Secretaries. You're both mums. Do you agree with that?
Look at the diaspora communities that we have in our country. It's not about Suella Braverman, and it's not about me.
No.
This is about our country. I'm the first to talk our country up. I'm the first to talk success up in our country. We are an amazing country, and we're an amazing home to people, quite frankly, that have chosen to make their lives in the United Kingdom. We're here in Manchester, which is home to many people from the BNO community who left Hong Kong in recent years. They're integrated. There are loads of people, millions of people contributing to our country.
Is Suella being too negative then? I mean, she's been accused of dog whistle politics.
I think some context around some of her remarks, is important. So I will give some context and examples. There are parts of the country we saw disruption, community tensions in Leicester last year.
Yes.
You can't just say that's not because people haven't integrated.
No.
People there want jobs. They want hope and aspiration. They also need their local councils and local government to work well for them. Labour Mayor, quite frankly, in Leicester has not been working well for them, not delivering for people. These are the types of things that we have to address. And quite frankly, as Conservatives in government, that's where we should be focusing on. And I do think when you look at the net contribution of our immigrant communities and diaspora to the United Kingdom, we'd not be seeing the range of foreign direct investment. Look at countries like Indian investors, for example. People from other parts of the world, Asia, the United States, come into our country, even Africa, and
What do you think the Home Secretary was doing? Was it a tilt at leadership?
I mean, look, you should ask her, Camilla. You really should.
We're delighted to have her on. If you want to come on, we'll speak to you next week.
I think actually, let's just again, just look at context. We're less than a year away from a general election.
Yeah.
Giving speeches is fine, but none of that is a substitute for action and delivery.
Right.
And if you look around the hall, this area today, the pledges are there. The government's
Are you
pledges.
frustrated then? You think it's too many words and not enough action from this government?
It's delivery. There'll be an election next year. The British people will judge this government on delivery. The 5 pledges, for example, stop the boats is one of them. Let's have less talk and focus on actually stopping the boats. I mean, 24,000 people have come over this year. It's a difficult issue. I know. I've been there.
Yes.
I've always said there's no one single solution, but be pragmatic, be practical, find solutions. We have the Supreme Court hearing coming up for the Rwanda judgment.
Well, what do you think on that? Because there's been talk about the ECHR today.
There has.
I think all of the Cabinet have been given a line from number 10 to say, everything's on the table.
Yes, I gather.
Yeah. What do you think should be on the table and taken off?
I'll give you my view.
Yeah.
I can't speak for anyone in government. I'm not in government. Number one, I support reform. I support reform when it comes to ECHR. I support reform of the UN 51 Convention. I went to see the head of the UNHCR last year with the foreign secretary from Rwanda when we announced our Rwanda plan.
There's a but coming.
But let's be quite clear about this, right? So ECHR, it's not about the rights and the principles. This is about the interpretation by the court in Strasbourg off judgments that go against our own laws, our own sovereign laws. And Camilla, we've been here before. Do you remember prisoner rights?
Yes.
So, you know, giving prisoners the right to vote. When you think about how that court intervenes to stop foreign national offenders from being removed from our country, that is not right. Our laws are crystal clear about the removal and the deportations of FNOs.
So are you pro full withdrawal from it?
So I think we have to reform. You can withdraw, but at the same time, is it about the rights or the principles or the interpretation? I don't think it's right that the court in Strasbourg is interfering in our domestic policies and in our laws, which is stopping actually a democratically elected government from implementing its own laws. And, you know, foreign national offenders is just one example. Prisoner votes. David Cameron was very clear about that at the time.
Yes.
We have been here many times before.
On that, the Home Office has decided when it comes to housing people in hotels that they must be in a 3-star hotel or above. Do you agree with that policy?
I don't agree with that policy.
So they could be in 1 star?
But I go further than that, Camilla, and you've heard me say this before, everyone's heard me say this. We had a proposal in the new plan for immigration to build reception centres. I called them Greek-style reception centres because they had detention facilities. And it's important that people that come here illegally are detained. So they're in a facility.
No hotels.
So I think, first of all, because we have our laws, so our laws basically say you can't detain people unless you can actually remove people. But you keep them in a reception centre, which the government could argue they've got with sites in Wethersfield and Braintree in my local area, but it's not. It's not the same, because these should be purpose-built, where people can be tracked, basically, so that they can't abscond. The government says people aren't absconding, but they are leaving. We need to know what is happening with people, and then you can process their asylum cases on site, so individuals know what is happening. Otherwise, it just becomes a complete
So it sounds like you
area.
think that the Home Office under Suella Braverman's being too soft on these migrants.
Well, I don't think the policy. I actually don't think the approach is right. And as I said, I've got a migrant camp in Wethersfield, in my district, in Braintree district, and quite frankly, it's locally, local residents, our local councils are paying for this. It's been opaque, there's been no transparency on financial payments. So, you know, politicians in government can make claims and statements saying asylum seekers are coming here and they're using our NHS. In Wethersfield, we have a private contractor, even though our own local residents have no access to the NHS and can't get GP appointments and things of that nature. So I think the government has to be transparent about what is going on. It's not being transparent. The department know exactly what I've been saying about this. I'm in constant contact with them. I'm not getting straightforward answers. But this is a classic case of people in government saying one thing and doing something completely different. My view is that they should have had purpose-built reception centres where basically...
But how? I mean, they couldn't build them that quickly, though, could they? You're saying you said this...
They could have. They could have. When the new plan for immigration was government policy under a democratically elected government, that should have come together. But you and I know what happened last year. Baby thrown out with the bathwater. Other people come in, think that they can
Are you saying the baby is Boris?
Actually, all our policies. So the policies of the 2019 manifesto
have been thrown
actually,
away.
That was a new plan for immigration being one of them. Where do you hear people in government now speaking up for some of these big policies?
You think that the problem with Rishi and the current cabinet is that they've torn up the Tory party manifesto?
So they've come in with their own interpretation. We were elected in 2019 on the people's priorities with very, very clear objectives, and that is the manifesto.
But you must like the watering down of the net zero stuff that was in the manifesto and has now slightly been timed down upon.
I've spoken to you about that previously. You know, we cannot just run headlong, particularly now. Inflation was double digit. It's now come down, thankfully. But also at a time when there's a cost of living crisis where people, you know, are really struggling. You cannot put more taxes on them, Camilla. And this is the point. Net zero agenda was full of cost, greater financial burdens and more taxes on people. That has to stop. You know, as Conservatives, we're meant to be on the side of hard-working, hard-pressed individuals, businesses and families. And this is effectively where we need to come back to being much more conservative.
The government's going quite wrong on a number of different levels.
Well, I would like to see a much more bold, ambitious, conservative agenda based on conservative principles.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show, live from the Conservative Party conference in Manchester. It's a little bit of a busman's holiday now because I'm here with my Telegraph colleague, Ben Riley-Smith, who's written this brilliant book. He's the political editor at the Telegraph, and the book is called The Right to Rule. Poor old Ben. I mean, what a task you have had to go over the last 13 years. Crumbs, where to even begin? What I'm intrigued by, we start another conference. You know, there's fighting going on left, right, centre. I receive a memo overnight slagging off Michael Gove, reminding me that he is a net zero zealot from an anonymous sender.
Okay.
Then we've got this WhatsApp group being exposed for calling Rishi Sunak somebody with the charisma of a doorknob. We've got Liz Truss bringing up the rear, saying we can't have any more tax rises. Are they a united party? Have they ever been, Ben? What is it with this lot?
Well, they're certainly not a united party right now. I think Rishi Sunak did quite a good job in that first year of stabilising things, of papering over the cracks. Because I think all Tories, whether you dislike Rishi or like him, they accepted that last year these 2 overhauls looked bad with the public, so they smoothed things over. But no, there are huge cracks beyond it, and in the coming days you're going to see them emerge on tax, on illegal immigration, and whether to pull out the ECHR. So yeah, there are deep divisions, and when you are 15, 20 points behind in the opinion polls, as they are right now...
Maybe 10, according to one today, which looks a little bit more hopeful. But why do you think that the Conservatives can't pick a leader and stick with them? I mean, it is extraordinary, isn't it? 5 leaders since 2016.
Well, one of the fun bits in the book was trying to get to all these key players and ask them that question. So I got to 120 plus people: Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, David Cameron, various others. And one thing that came out was the Tories are more ruthless in their pursuit of power than Labour, I think, and have the structures to shapeshift what they mean to the public. You know, it only takes 15% of their MPs to trigger a no confidence vote. In Labour, it's 20%.
Yes.
They've all got to do it on the record. So they have a structure that if they feel the public are moving against them, they can get rid of a leader and change quite quickly.
Yeah.
I think that's what we've seen over the last couple of years, and that is different from Labour.
Priti Patel referred to it as throwing the baby out with the bathwater earlier. She meant the deposing of Boris Johnson. I also asked Michael Gove, did he regret that moment when he knifed him back in 2016? Had he not have knifed him, things could have been really different. I mean, do we see that as the catalyst to the destruction that followed? Because sometimes you try and trace all of the roads of kind of Tory turmoil back to something.
Yeah.
It sort of does seem to lead back to that moment.
Well, I think the big moment, I suppose, was an accidental Brexit, if you like.
Yes.
The UK government didn't want it to happen at the time. David Cameron, George Osborne, the public voted for it, and then suddenly you had the economic and foreign policy tossed in the air. And it was in that scramble that followed that you got these betrayals. If Michael Gove hadn't turned on Boris Johnson in the leadership race right after that referendum, probably Boris Johnson would have become Prime Minister. Probably the grassroots would have picked a Brexiteer.
Yeah.
And then maybe he would have had the ability to push it through Parliament. Maybe he would have won the next election that came, where Theresa May should have won, really. She was miles ahead.
Yes.
And lost. But no, I think Brexit is the kind of seismic moment in this 13 years, the before and after point. And it's since Brexit. Cameron was in power, Tory leader, for 11 years before that. And then you had these kind of 3 successive changes in 6 or 7 years. So certainly that kind of scrambling of the snow globe of politics has had all these repercussions for them.
What do you make of some suggestions in the week that Liz Truss is eyeing up a second bid should it all go wrong for the Tories at the next general election, Ben?
I don't think she genuinely thinks she can be leader or Prime Minister again, but I do think she thinks she can shape who will be the next Prime Minister or leader again.
Yes.
And that's why she's championing the kind of side of the argument that she believes in, the tax cutting, the scaling back of regulations, because to me it seems like she's got one eye on what could happen late next year if they lose an election. There is a leadership race. She wants those policies and that side of the party to prevail despite what happened last autumn.
And do you think Cincinnatus Boris wants to come back at some point?
Return from his plough and take up power. I'm sure if he's given the snapshot. I mean, we saw it last year, right? He was out of Downing Street for something like 6 weeks, 7 weeks, and still tried to come back. So I'm sure if there was possibly a way to do it, he would. But I mean, there are quite a few steps there now. He's got to somehow get back into Parliament. So I doubt it's imminent. I don't think it's going to be in the next race. But I'm sure he's keeping half an eye on it. He said when he was leaving, I'm stepping away for Parliament for now. So I think if there was ever the opportunity, he would jump at it.
How do you think Rishi Sunak is doing? I was saying to Nigel Nelson earlier, I think he's in a better position now than he was 6 months ago. Can he gain momentum? Because we hear from his people, he's very confident, he's bullish. He thinks they can win whenever the election is, which is when, do you think, spring or autumn?
I still think it's autumn. I don't quite understand the rationale for why it would be spring. I mean, I liken it to a man with a guillotine hanging above their neck and kind of willingly snipping the rope. If you are so far behind, why don't you give it a couple of months and maybe something will come up? There's an argument for Boris Johnson lasted longer as Prime Minister because the Ukraine war happened out from the left field and it calmed Tory nerves because they had to rally behind the Prime Minister.
But is it misplaced optimism for Rishi Sunak, do you think? Or is there a chance they could actually do this?
Well, never say never.
No.
In 2017, Theresa May was miles ahead of Jeremy Corbyn.
Yeah.
And she ended up, at the end of that campaign, losing the Tory majority. I mean, I think what they really think is if you zoom in on specific policy areas, rather than just loosely thinking about politics, they can draw these dividing lines that have the electorate the right side of them and Labour. So net zero, drivers, possibly trans issues, possibly tax cuts later down the line.
Well, is it as simple as that? Clarify whether or not a woman can have a penis, scrap IHT, bring corporation tax down, carry on with the climate climb down, do a couple of other things that are good for the righties and everything will be okay?
Well, the problem is on the big stuff they classically run on, you have a problem because normally it's economic competence front and centre in a Tory re-election bid, and that has drifted away after the debacle in the autumn and the changes on the market. So the strategists are scrabbling around trying to pick things that if they zoom in on, they can beat Labour on.
On that, do we think Rishi Sunak is happy with Hunt? I say this because, again, there were some whispers in the week. What's their relationship like? Because it's not Osborne and Cameron, is it?
No, and point one, as I write in the book, Jeremy Hunt was not Rishi Sunak's first choice.
That's right. He had to be told, oh, by the way, you're going to have to keep this guy to keep the markets happy. And Sunak, which I thought showed a bit of political naivety, sort of went, oh, I hadn't considered that.
I think, if he'd won in that summer, I think the names that were knocking around were Oliver Dowden, John Glenn, these types of figures who are very close to Rishi for that spot. But he came in after the second race next year, which was all about calming the markets, calming the party. If you had a chancellor there switching the chancellor, I think they thought it would be too much of an upheaval. I think they are quite like-minded. They're both kind of moderate, centrist Tories who believe in fiscal responsibility. But yeah, it's certainly true that if he had a clean slate in the summer, he wouldn't have picked Hunt for the chancellor.
And on Sunak, to finish, Ben, who is this guy really? I mean, you look at his maiden speech, it's very Thatcherite. He says, I am a Brexiteer, although he didn't do that much kind of high-profile campaigning. He's like, claims to be a Conservative, but sometimes he keeps it very well disguised.
Yeah, well, in the Telegraph at the weekend, we interviewed Oliver Dowden, Deputy PM, but also very close to Rishi. And he said, look, the truth is, this guy is much, much, much of a traditional low-tax, low-regulation Tory than sometimes he might let on. And I think this autumn you will see the real Rishi beginning to stand up and say, look, I'm not just an administrator, I do have some ideology.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. It stays mixed over the next few days. We'll see some rain at times, but there will be some drier and brighter intervals. Temperatures generally on the warm side for the time of year. At the moment, low pressure generally dominates the weather pattern, but this area of high pressure starts to move in towards the middle of the week across the south. Across the south this evening, though, quite a cloudy picture, outbreaks of patchy rain at times too, and that continues overnight, some low cloud, mist and murk developing here. Further north, generally drier, some clear spells for Northern Ireland, Scotland, but turning windy across the Highlands with showers here. And temperatures for most generally staying in double figures. A warm start to the day across southern counties of England and Wales. Quite cloudy here, though, with patchy rain and drizzle. And then through the day, we'll see cloud amounts increase across England and Wales. Some heavy rain developing. Bright skies for Northern Ireland and Scotland through the day, but still some scattered showers. Staying windy across the northwest of Scotland. Temperatures high teens to low 20s, 22 or 23 possible towards the far southeast where we see any sunshine. Into Tuesday, we've got early rain clearing southeastwards, and then it's a bright day with sunny spells and scattered showers. Showers moving in quite quickly across the northern half of the UK on that brisk westerly breeze. Best of the sunshine across southern areas. Temperatures a little lower, but staying around average over the next few days before increasing further towards the weekend. See you soon.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30am.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show, that's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
The live